Everyone, in today's video we're going to go over the UI system inside Unity, and we'll also go over some basic scene management as well. So what I have here already is a really basic scene where all I can do is I can walk around, and I have a bullet I can shoot out of my cube gun here, and I've applied some basic materials to the walls and floor. I grabbed a checkerboard texture, etc. So what I want to do is I want to add a UI to this scene that can keep track of, my ammo and things like that. We could extend it further, but at first we're just going to cover ammo. So Unity's UI system has gone through a couple iterations over the history of the engine, and currently it uses a pretty nice and easy to use system that I'm a pretty big fan of. So to create a UI, you need to find the canvas game object. So if you go up to game object UI, you can create a new canvas, and you'll see that I get this new item in my hierarchy called canvas. So if I go into the scene view and I toggle into 2D view, when you're working in UI, it's really important to be able to toggle between 2D and 3D. So I have this box, okay? And this box is more or less the same aspect ratio as my game window. So as I make this bigger, you see it also changes. Okay, and so this sort of is the screen. Now, your UI doesn't have to exist on top of everything else. You could put it in world space. There's a lot of stuff you could do with your UIs. So to look at some examples of how games do different things, let me just close some Reddit tabs. A good example of a game that has a UI in world space, sort of in world space, is Dead Space. Now, Dead Space puts its UI, when you open a menu like this, it sort of casts it in front of you. Dead Space also uses something called like a diegetic UI, where you can actually see information in the 3D space. So, for example, this health is the back of his suit. Another good example is Splinter Cell Conviction. Now, lots of games do this now, but let's look up Splinter Cell Conviction UI. This is the one that always struck out to me the most, and you can see how they've cast the UI into the world there. And that's stuff we can do pretty easily in Unity. But to start, we're just going to make a UI that puts some ammo down here. Alright, so I have this canvas component, and if I right-click it and scroll down to UI, there are a bunch of different types of UI components I can add. So I'm going to start really simply just with some text. Okay, so now that I have this new text game object in the hierarchy, you see that I have this thing in the middle here called new text. I can resize this. You see this little box I have? This is the rect transform tool. And you can see that I actually have this fifth box highlighted up here. The shortcut for this tool is T. So we have Q for the hand, W for the basic transform tool, E for rotate, R for scale, and T for rectangular transform. So all of these are available to you in the UI system. However, they do slightly different things, or they have slightly different purposes. So if I look at this text game object over in the inspector, you can see it's got a couple things going on. First, notice that we have a rectangular transform as opposed to a regular transform on any other game object. UI components, including the canvas, have a rectangular transform. This means that they are defined by 4 different points that make up a rectangle. So, right, we got the 4 points basically of a rectangle. It's more like 4 lines, right? So you can imagine a rect transform lets you push and pull these lines, and it basically redraws that container based off of whatever you have. So this text component, it has this rect transform, and I can type in some text, call it hello Unity UI. Okay, and I can change things like a font size, etc. There are a lot of different components I can change. Now, I want to talk about the rect transform here. Okay, so what the rect transform does is it lets us create UIs that'll work on a bunch of different aspect ratios. Now, one of the hardest things to do when developing a game, like one of the hardest things to do technically is to make sure that your game, especially your game's UI, works on every kind of computer or device that plays it. Now, if we were using an arcade cabinet, right, well, then the monitor's the same every time. You don't need to do this. But if you were doing it for a console game or a PC game, one person could have a 1080p monitor, the next a 720p, the next person could have a 4K monitor. The possibilities are endless, and there are a couple tricks we can use to make sure that it always looks right, okay? So there are three common ways that I usually see talked about, okay? So let's say your game looks like this, okay? And you have, we'll say this is like a 16 by 9 monitor, and you have some text down here, like say you have your player's health, right? Okay, so one thing to keep in mind is, well, what if now we're on a more square screen, right? What do? Do we cut this off? So then this would be out there and it wouldn't be visible. Do we move it in and keep it the same size, or do we move it in and scale it? So something like that, right? These are important decisions that you need to make. You can either stretch, scale, move, or clip your UIs. Okay, so if you've ever seen a game do the black bars thing, right? What it actually does is, it's got these guys. It rescales the game so that it's always in the same aspect ratio, so that it always looks the same scale. Now, it might be different, might be a different resolution, but the game will look the same. And it does that by just scaling and fitting everything inside the same aspect ratio. So if you're playing on the natural aspect ratio of the game, you wouldn't need the black bars. Anyway, like I said, the main choice we will make in Unity is whether or not we're going to take this element and anchor it to the bottom left. And anchoring it means that when the screen gets smaller or bigger, the UI element stays where it is relative to the point it's anchored to, and it stays the same size. We could also tell it to stretch to the relative size of its container. So, if you could imagine, instead we have an element in the middle, okay, like this, okay, and we define this as being this far from either edge, okay? Now, on this screen, this element would look more like that, because we want to keep everything the same distance. So the width changed, but the height didn't, right? So, similarly, if you had a wider screen, right, like, you'd get it wider. So, this is something that's not just restricted to UI. You actually kind of need to think about this, especially if you're making a 2D game. With 3D games and the way cameras work, it's something you don't really think about in the same way. It's a different sort of problem, though I should say it's really a different sort of solution, though I'd say the problem still exists. So let's hop back over to Unity, and this is what this rect transform lets us easily do. It lets us define whether we want to anchor ourselves or stretch ourselves to our container. So this is all set up in the hierarchy of your UI. So we have this canvas root object, and everything that's a child of it is part of the UI, and everything that's a child or part of the UI has a rect transform. So that text had a transform. Let me quickly make another one. And let me make a image, okay? And so I'm not going to apply any sprite to it quite yet. But, I can move this image around and notice that it's on top of the text. That is because draw order in the UI system is not handled by Z position. It's handled by order in the hierarchy. So the things lower in the hierarchy get drawn last. So if I move this image above the text, it would get drawn first, and then the text would get drawn, right? So the text would be on top. Similarly, if I made the text a child of the image, it would still get drawn on top of it, but now they move together, okay? So, let me unparent these guys again. Let's talk about anchoring, right? So, currently, we are anchored to the middle of the screen, okay? That means if I put this guy over here, okay, as I make the UI smaller, you see that the key, sometimes I'm inside, sometimes that image is inside the UI, and sometimes it's not, right? So what's happening is right now, my right transform says I need to be negative 630 units from the anchor point, and the anchor point's the middle. And you can look at these numbers or this little box here. Okay, so there are a bunch of built-in anchor points that you can use, and if I click on this box, you see I get this little pop-up, and I can click on any of these to change the anchor point. If I changed it up here or over to the left, now my cube will actually stay on the screen. Okay, and you see it stays in the same spot because it's anchored to the left hand side of the screen. If I keep it in the middle and I resize my window vertically, right, it stays where it is. So if I did it in the top left though, and now I rescaled vertically, what's going on? Oh, there we go. You need to sometimes you need to let the UI redraw. By the way, especially in the editor, you don't get a constant thing like we would in play mode. So anyway, you can drag around the window. By the way, you can also click this thing that says free aspect. Say you wanted to build your game to see how it looks in 16:9. You could force that on, and you see what it does with this. It's basically the same thing as that black handlebar thing we were just talking about. If you were making a mobile game, you could set it to vertical aspect ratios. You could add your own. So you could also give it specific pixel resolutions if you'd wanted to as well. So let's say I want to make a health bar, okay? I want to anchor this guy to the bottom left, okay? And so there are a couple shortcuts. If I hold down Alt or Shift, I can also set the pivot point of my UI element and the position. So holding down Alt, it'll actually travel to the spot I click on, which is pretty handy. Holding Shift also sets the pivot point, or so you see where my transform tool is. That's the pivot point, and that's where I move it from. And so this is something you can't do really easily with 3D tools in Unity, but it's something that's really easy to do in the UI. So you can combine just these built-in ones in really powerful ways, but you can also define your own anchor points. Let's say you wanted it to anchor 20% of the way through the screen. I would set my minimum X anchor to 0.2. Okay, and my max to 0.3 as well. Okay, so now you can see the anchor point is this 4 transparent triangles, okay, these carrots, and they move apart depending on where I've pivoted. And you see, if I set custom anchor points, I get different things here. It shows that they're custom. So the other thing we can do is we can stretch. Okay, and stretching is, like we said, instead of having it anchor to our container, we will have it resize so that it's relatively the same distance from its container's edges. Okay, so we could do this on the left and right. Okay, and now you see that instead of having an if I go back here, instead of having an X and Y position, now we have left and right, and that is how many units from the left and right side of the container being its parent element. So right now it's just the canvas that we want this to be. So if I change the left, you see, look at that. It's resizing the box, okay? So I say I want this to always be 400 from the left, and I want this to always be 400 from the right. And now as I move these guys in, you see the box gets smaller. And in fact, if we get on too small of a screen, you see it gets so small it disappears. So these are problems you need to be aware of to fix. So we can have it go with the vertical instead, okay? And so now when I do this, right, see, it doesn't resize, but when I whoa, there you go, right? There's lots of things you can do here. I could actually have it anchor to every point, okay? All right, and if I hold Alt-Shift-Click when I do this, you see it resizes the whole thing. So if I wanted to make a background, this actually isn't a bad way to do it. And then essentially, now I say the distance from the left, top, right, and bottom of the container, and this functions a lot like padding. Okay, so I could make this really lower the alpha, and you can see I have the background. Now, I'm not going to do that, but you can see it gets pretty powerful. And by the way, using an image without any sprite lets you just make square panels, which actually is really useful for a lot of UI stuff, especially prototyping. So I'm going to anchor this image to the bottom left, and I'm going to make it a, say like 400 width and 200 height, okay? And in here, I'm going to put my current ammo, okay? This is a little too big. Let's make it like 300 by 150, okay? So I'm going to take this text, okay? And now you see that when I made it a child of the image, okay? Let's undo that. You see, right now, it's anchored to the middle of the screen. It's anchored to the middle of its container, really. And so if I make it a child of the image and keep the same anchor points, now you see the anchors over here in the image because its container is the image. So if I set it to 0, right? Okay, now it's in there. And so one of the reasons why this text isn't actually centered, right, is I still have paragraph alignment like I would in Microsoft Word. So if I do that, now it's centered. Okay. So right now this is okay, right? But what I want to do is I want to make sure that this scales relative on my screen size. So I'm going to set its parent to scale with the screen size, okay? Actually, that doesn't look that great. You know what, let's just keep it anchored, okay? We'll keep it anchored. But with the text, I want to have it stretch to the with the width of the container, but be anchored to the top, okay? So that's what this one is here, right? So these stretch, you can stretch with either the width or the height and then anchor to one of the sides you are not stretching with. So if I stretch horizontally, I can anchor to the top or bottom, vice versa if I stretch vertically. So now you can see that I have a couple different things I can set. I'll set the height to like 20, okay? And this is actually really useful to see in the game view, okay? So you can see that my anchor points are actually here and here, okay? Whereas on the image, they're all here because everything's anchored to the bottom left. So the height is the white line, and you can sort of see it happen as you do here. So text is not the best thing to see this with. So if I actually created a child image of this, I could give this guy a background, okay? Boop. Instead of, we'll do it this way. So this guy, the text will become a child of that background, and the image will be anchored to the top. Okay? So now, as I resize the image, you see the text sort of travels with me. So I can make my own kind of cool little UI containers this way, or custom UI bits. So, let's change this to a different color. Okay. So I'll make this like a little title. We'll call it ammo counts. Okay. And then below this image, I'm going to create another text field. Okay. And I want this to be more or less in the middle of the container. Okay. And I'm going to say, let's say I have 30 bullets out of 30. Just for the time being, I'm going to center this guy again. And I can make this font size bigger, but I also want to show you there's this best fit option, which will resize your font to be the best fit inside its container. Okay, so look at that. As I resize it, the font gets bigger. And there is a max size, so I may want to set that up a little higher. And you see, sometimes when you change something, like bits disappear. That's okay. You just need to let it kind of refresh. So if I hit play, you see everything's just fine. So if it disappears on you like that, don't freak out. You probably are just fine. So we'll leave this there. Alright, and then we'll recenter this. Okay, and so what we want to do is every time we shoot, we want to remove one bit of this ammo. And let's make this white so it's easier to see. Okay, and I could even add an outline, by the way. So there are a couple built-in UI things that we can add. If I just type outline, it's a component, and you see it adds a black outline. There's also shadow, which gives me basically a drop shadow, and I can make these a little bit bigger. Alright, so now what I want to do is, I'll call this ammo text. Inside my FPS controller, and I have a script called gun, okay, every time I shoot, I want to subtract one bit of ammo and then update that UI element. So, you can see at the top of my script here, I have this line called using UnityEngine.ui. That's not ordinarily there. I added that in just before I started the video. So this is what my script would look like without any UI elements into it. If I want to get references to this text component, though, okay, so this is a text component. Like if we wanted to get references to game objects or transforms or any other component we make, right, we always put a public variable at the top of the script. So for UI, we need to import the UI namespace, because without it, if I start typing public text, okay, you see, I don't actually have that text component anywhere there. There's like GUI text, and this is something I want you to be careful about. Whenever you see these GUI, there is a legacy UI system inside Unity, and you should just ignore it for now. It can be helpful for some things, especially if you're doing custom editor scripting, but for most stuff that will go into production-oriented games, you will be ignoring it completely now. So, you see that there was no text, so let's say ammo text, right? And if I go back here, let it compile, won't get an error in the console, and it just says the type or namespace text could not be found. That means we need to import the namespace that has text, and that's the UI namespace. So C# divides things into things called namespaces, and namespaces are just homes for code. So by default, every script you make is inside the Unity engine namespace, sort of. And you want to get the UI namespace, which is like a sub namespace. It gets confusing. But anyway, you see when I do that, now I don't have that error. And now, if I click on my gun, which is somewhere in this hierarchy, okay, I have this spot to drag in some text. So I can drag in this ammo text. Okay, and so now every time I shoot, I want to lose 1 bit of ammo and update my ammo text. Okay, so I'm going to make a variable called ammo. Okay, I like to put an underscore in front of my private variables. I'll set this to 0. I also want to set max ammo as a parameter. I'll leave it at 30 so it matches what we have in the UI, but as a parameter we could change it. Okay, and then in start, I'm going to set ammo to max ammo. Okay, and now every time I shoot, I want to get rid of 1 bullet out of my ammo. Okay, so ammo minus minus just subtracts 1 from ammo and sets ammo to that value. Okay, and then what I want to do is I want to have a function that sort of like updates all my UI components, and I will call that here in shoot, but I'm going to make one. This is just useful in case you start setting multiple UI elements. We'll call it UI routine. Well, this is just going to set a bunch of UI stuff. I try to avoid calling things like UI update because then it could be confused with regular update. There's no special magic function that we use. So, and then here I'm just going to call UI routine. And in UI routine, I'm going to say ammo text dot text, and so this is really confusing to some people. What happens if I look at this text component, right? You see, this text is a property of the component. The component itself is not a string. I can't set string equal to it, but I can set string to its text component. This is the content, okay? And I say ammo text dot text equals. I'm going to use a string formatter, okay? So a string formatter just is a quick way to let me build strings and provide a bunch of different arguments inside my string. So the way I'm going to do this, okay, so I'm going to type string.format, okay? And then I need to give it a string format, and a string format in C# is putting things inside curly braces, okay? So I'm going to have 2 arguments separated by a slash, okay? And the first argument is going to be my ammo as a string, and the second argument will be my max ammo as a string. Okay, so what this format is saying is return a string that looks something like this, that replaces this with the 0 arguments that follows, and replace this with the second argument that follows. Right, so it's index based, kind of like an array, so it starts at 0. So now, if I hit play, let's double check that I've assigned text. And every time I shoot, you see it goes down by 1. So that's just a basic way, but it keeps going. So I'd want to make something in here saying I can only shoot if my ammo is greater than 0. And I'm holding down the mouse button. Okay? And I'll just click a bunch. Alright, there we go. So that works. So the next thing I want to do is add a little reload functionality. So I'm going to say if input.getKeyDown keycode.r. Okay, I'm going to make a reload function. And all reload's going to do is set ammo equal to max ammo again. And then update UI routine, call UI routine. And that's not a function, can't do that. And I'm going to replace my stuff and start with the reload function. Okay. So now, I hit R, I reload. Okay, so next thing I want to do is I want to add a slider, okay? That tells me the same thing as 30 out of 30, but does it kind of like you would have a health bar, okay? So it's going to slide from right to left. When it's right, it's full, and when it's all the way to the left, I have no ammo left. Okay, so I'm going to right-click my image again, and I'm going to add a slider. And this one, I'm going to anchor to the bottom, like that. Okay, so you see I get this slider, and if I hit play... By the way, if you're using the first-person controller, you can hit escape to enable the mouse. Anyway, so you see, I can actually move this left and right. So I don't want a slider that I can manipulate. I want this to be like a progress bar. And the reason Unity doesn't have a built-in progress bar is because it's really easy to change my slider into a progress bar. First, I just delete this handle area, okay, and you see it gets rid of the knob. And now, if I hit play, alright, I can still interact with it, but I don't have a knob. And also, okay, so you can see this little problem where as I go all the way to the right, it doesn't quite go all the way, so there's a couple things that need to change. Okay, so to make it so that I can't interact with it anymore, I simply click the interactable toggle on the slider component itself. And then I click on fill area. Okay, you see it's set to 5 and 15 on the right. This means it's stretching to the width of its container. I want to set that to 5 and 5. Okay. And so now when I hit play, I can't change this anymore. Okay, but if I go back over to my slider, you see I can change this guy, and now my values are changing right. So what I want to do is in the script, I want to change this value from 1 to 0. Okay, so that's pretty easy to do. I got my text component. I can say public slider ammo slider, okay, and then inside my UI routine, I'm just going to say ammo slider dot value is equal to my ammo divided by my max ammo. Okay, and so these are both integers. If you're familiar with the concept of integer arithmetic, you know that if an integer doesn't go into another integer evenly, then it's going to truncate. So I will never get a number between 0 and 1. I will never get a decimal point by dividing two integers. So I'm just going to cast my ammo to a floating point number so that I get an integer. Or sorry, that I get a decimal between 0 and 1. And because my ammo is never greater than my max ammo, and ammo is never less than 0, I know I'm always going to go between 0 and 1. So on my gun, I drag in my slider, and now when I hit play, you can see as I shoot, it goes down. Okay, so I want to make this a little bit more colorful. I could change the background, right? So when I don't have any ammo, they see red. Otherwise, they see my fill color, which it'll be like green for having lots of ammo, I guess. Okay, so that's a really basic way to add in some text and kind of a progress bar, right? So you could link this up to health. You could have text for different things. One other thing I want to show you with the text is something called rich text. So if I go back over here and I just search for rich text Unity, okay, this is a really helpful feature that Unity has that lets us write basically HTML inside of the UI fields, okay? We can bold things, italicize things, change the text size, and this lets us do everything in a single line. This is really helpful. Now, if everything's going to be the same color and size, just stick to this, okay? So if I wanted everything to be red, I'd tint it red there. But if I only want certain words, okay, what I will do instead is I will change my string formatter to contain the rich text I want. But just to show you how rich text works, if I set this to italics, okay, you can see until the tag is complete. Alright, but now it's italicized. And I can turn on and off rich text here if I don't want to use it. Okay, so I could color things #00 ff00. Right, and that colors it green, etc. So what I'm going to do is, if I have, if I have like max ammo, okay, I'm going to keep my text white, but if I go below half, I'm going to change it to red. Okay, so my color equals hashtag, and then I'm going to give this I leave that as 0. And so I need to add a new argument here, right? And that'll be the color string. And so now the argument is going to be a string I make color string. And so by default, I'm going to say it's white, which is just oh goodness gracious, it's FF. Okay, and now if my ammo is less than max ammo divided by 2, color string will be red, which will be FF0000. And so then I just plug this in here. Okay, so when I go below 15, you see it changes to red. Okay? So that is a really useful feature. If you search rich text, there are a lot of different ways to use it. You can't really use a color picker in the same way, but you can certainly do a lot of cool things. So I'm going to leave this scene as it is, and I want to make a main menu, okay? And the main menu, when I click play in the main menu, is going to load my scene here, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to prefab my level geometry so that I can make a 3D main menu. Alright, now that I got prefabbed, I'm going to make a new scene, and I'm just going to drag in my level geometry. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make a new canvas. Alright, I'm going to add in some text that I'm going to put somewhere kind of in the middle-ish of the screen. I'll say best game ever, so this will be like my title. And I'll set this to a pretty high font. And so you'll see that at some point my font just disappears, and that's because my overflow, right, my text should be bigger than its container right now. And when this happens, there are a couple different things that we can do. We can set it to overflow, right, and now you see the text is way bigger than its container. We can keep it at what it was before, okay. Wrap would say, if we had too much text, so if this was like best game ever, okay, and then you see it wraps it onto the next line. That's not what I want to do, though. One thing I could do is I can add something called a content size fitter, and this makes the container, so it's this rect transform, fit the size of its content. And I can just set that to preferred size on either, and you see now as I resize the font, it just resizes the container. This is really useful if you just want arbitrary text that just kind of floats on its own. Okay, so I'm going to pull this up, and I'm going to go grab a font from a font site. I like the font, but you could use Font Squirrel or whatever you like. And sure, I'll get this one. So you need to be careful. Sometimes these fonts aren't actually free for commercial use, they're just free for personal use. So for this, it's not a big deal. But if you were making a game you want to publish, you should be careful. So I'm going to drag this font into my assets folder. Okay, and so all I did was drag my TrueType font file inside here, and Unity picks it up. And now if I go over to my text, I can just click here, and set it to this. And okay, look at that, I've got a brand new font. I'll set this to white and give it a black outline, because then it's pretty much legible no matter what's behind it. Alright, I want to add in a button, and when I click this button, I want to load my main scene. Okay, so this button I'm going to add in, I'm going to set its text to play, and I'm going to grab another font, one that's a little bit more legible. Let's look for some basic fonts here, why not this? Okay, and just about any font type will do, but if it doesn't work, you just find a different font, generally. Alright, and I'm going to set this guy to best fit. Okay, so, alright, so I've got this button, and when I press it, I want to load the next scene. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new script, and I'm just going to call this main menu. And I'm going to attach this to my canvas. Oop, gotta let it finish compiling before you can add it. I'm going to rename my canvas to main menu. Okay, and now inside main menu, alright, I'm going to import UI again. I don't know if I'll actually. Well, here's what we'll do. I'll let myself change the text of that banner pretty easily. So we'll say game title, and we'll say the game that rocks. And then in start, I'm just gonna. Whoop. My bad. And title. Game title text. Alright, and then in start, I'm going to say game title text.text equals title. Alright, so I'm going to drag that text object. And okay, so now when I hit play, instead of best game ever, I get the game that rocks. Okay, so if I want to call a function from my code, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a public function. And so public functions will be visible to my button. And we'll show how that works in a second. I'm just going to say load next, or load main. Okay, and then in here, I want to import the scene manager utility namespace. Okay, so if I type using Unity engine .scene management, okay, this is what lets me load scenes at runtime, and loading scenes is how I load different levels. You will see some legacy code that uses something called application.loadLevel. This is that is entirely deprecated until recently. It's what I always used, and I finally got on board with the scene manager utility, and it's pretty nice. So I'm going to say scene manager.load scene, okay, and I'm just going to give it the name of my other scene, which was called main. And so when I click this button, I want to load the scene. Okay. So on click button. Okay, so this listener, okay, you see on the button here, we have all these different parameters, okay, and what I did was, here, I'll remove it for a second. We can set whether or not the button's interactable. You can even set what color the button will tint itself based on its state, whether it's whether you're hovering over it with your mouse, etc. But also when I click the button, what do I want to do? I want to run the function. So I can hit this plus button, it gives me a new little row here, and then I can drag in any game object into here. Okay, and then this lets me highlight or select any component that's on that object, including my main menu component, and then any public function that's from that component, like load main. Now all these other functions and variables you see are because they're public and because we derive mono behavior. That's why you see those. Okay, so now if I hit play and I click this button, look at that. Okay, so there's in order for that to work though, you need to add the scene to your build settings. And so I'd already done this. So if I go to File, Build Settings, okay, I'd done this before. Okay, so I'm gonna add my okay, so I want to make sure that these are all clicked. what I can do is I can drag in scenes into this view, okay? I can reorder them, etc. Okay, so if I didn't have this in there, which is what you'll have by default, I had just already added it in there before I started the video. If I hit play, you see I get this error. All right, you don't want that error. That error just says you can't load it because it hasn't been added to your build settings. So I'm just gonna go ahead, add it to my build settings, drag in main, and we're good to go. Okay, so this, by the way, this black nonsense that we're seeing, this is just a bug I've been having with this scene. It doesn't really actually happen. So I'm going to save my main menu scene. The reason why we had to add things to build settings is because when we build our game, so if I go up to File, Build, and Run, okay, when you build the game, it generates your executable and data folder that you can send to other people to play the game. So ultimately, when you're going to submit the game to Steam, the App Store, whatever, right, you're making a build. Okay, so if I just play my game windowed, right, I'm going to get my main menu, and then I'll get the scene. So, great, the game that rocks. I hit play, and you can see that that bug's not happening when I build. I'm not sure why that's happening inside my editor. Doesn't happen on every computer or every time either. So, anyway, okay, so I want to add in a quit button, all right? And I also want to make this a little bit prettier altogether, okay? So there's two things I'm going to do. First, I'm going to go grab some UI sprites, okay? So AssetJesus, kenny.nl/assets has a ton of stuff, okay? So again, if I go to his main page here, right, and I click on, oh man, anything. If I click on his assets, all right, there's just so many packs. There's pages and pages of this stuff, and it's all pretty good. Some of it's 3D, some of it's 2D, etc. So I'm going to just download these game icons. Okay, and I want to import the Sprite Sheet. Okay, so one of the most expensive things that happens in a game engine, and especially on mobile, is something called a draw call. And a draw call is every time your graphics card tells your processor to draw to the screen. Okay. So this is a big bottleneck on computers with worse graphics cards and the like. So it's a big problem on mobile, for example. And what a sprite sheet does is it lets us reduce draw calls. So every material you have or every unique sprite has the potential for being a different draw call. It won't always be a new draw call, but if I put things in a sprite sheet, I can condense all of these icons into a single image and a single draw call. So if let me just open up my assets folder again. All right, if I drag in, if I look in this, I look in this zip file, right? You can see that he has pings of every single sprite, okay? And I could drag in just the ones I want. He also has sprite sheets, okay? And these sprite sheets have PNGs and XML files. We only need the PNG file when we're inside Unity. What these XML files do, I can open one up here. These explain to most engines where the different sprites are, okay, what their names are, etc. Okay, and you can even see that they're saying each of these sprites is about 100 by 100 units. All right, so I'm going to drag this white sprite sheet in there, okay. And now if I go back to Unity and let it import, see, look at this. I've got this, okay, and this has every single image inside it. And of course, if I drag this into my scene view, I get a little sprite. And if I, where'd it go? Oh, it's not set to a sprite. My bad. All right, I need to set this to a sprite, 2D and UI, okay? So you see that whenever you import a texture, you have a bunch of different options. When you're dealing with the UI system, you want to make sure the stuff's set to sprite. You can also use the sprite for the 2D system. So if I drag this guy in there, right, we get stuff. So it looks like I accidentally somehow overrode the somehow I attached the wrong material to the ground there for a second. That's weird. Anyway, okay, so I also want to set this stuff to no filter and true color. This just makes stuff a little crisper. It's not always what you want. I'm not going to go into details why, but just for these UI icons, I'm going to leave them like that. Let me hop back to my 2D view and focus on my canvas. Okay, so right now if I make an image, okay, and I click on the sprite I want to attach to it, I have some stuff from standard assets, okay, that are individual sprites, and I could use those, but I don't have any of the sprites for my sprite sheet. But if I click on the sprite sheet, you see, you get this. What I want to do is I want to cut up all of my sprites. And so the sprite mode lets me say this is actually a sprite sheet. There are multiple sprites in this image that I want to get. And then I click on the Sprite Editor. I get a pop-up, and this lets me slice up my sprite. There's a couple different options. I can slice them automatically, and if I hit slice automatically, you see Unity tries to define each of these chunks as its own sprite. But it's turning things like my hamburger button here into 3 different sprites. But just to show what this does, if I hit apply, okay, and now I expand sheet white, you see, look at this. There's hundreds of sprites there, and if I click on my image now and apply it, I have all of them. Okay, if I click that image, and you can see, look at that, I got it. Instead of that, though, I know exactly what size those sprites are supposed to be, right? When I looked at the XML file, I saw that they were 100 by 100. So if I click this Sprite Editor again, instead of doing automatic, I can say, let's do it by cell size. And I know each cell size is 100 by 100. And if I slice this up, look at that. Now they're all perfect, okay? Okay, so now my image looks just a tiny bit crisper. And all images let me set, I can preserve the aspect ratio or set it to the native size. Preserve aspect ratio just means if I resized it this way, right? If I resized it disproportionately, the image stays proportional. So if this was off, you see it's stretching it. So that can be really useful. So I'll make a, you can also do, sorry, just set native size, you see what it does, it just set it to 100 by 100, which was the size of the sprite. So I'm going to make this a button, okay, and when I click it, I want to quit. Let's see if there's a better icon. This will work. Okay, and so I need to make a quit button, or a quit function. I'm going to say quit. And for this, I say application.quit. Okay, and so inside here, I want to call, I link it through the same way. And I can make any image into a button. It just means that this component, whenever I click it, that's when the function gets called. Main menu quit. Okay, and so I can't actually quit the editor from code, so I'm going to make a print statement say quitting. Alright, just so that we can make sure that's getting pressed. When I build the game, it's a different story. It will quit the executable, okay? So you can see it printed it there. So if I build again, Control B is the shortcut for that. I hit play. And I hit quit. You see, it just shuts down the game. Okay. So, I can keep that icon there. I can also, I want to add in another button. Okay, so instead of play, let's say you'd have an options button. Now I'm not going to implement an options menu right now. That would take a lot of time, but I'm just going to have an options button. And I'm not going to hook it up to anything. I'm just going to have it so that we can do some layouts. So laying out stuff inside the UI system can actually be kind of tricky is not the right word, but annoying after a while, right? So let's say I wanted my buttons to stay together, okay? I could make the options button a child of button, and they move around together, sure. But now when I resize button, weird things happen. Like I want them both to be the same size. Unity has something for this called a layout group, okay? And I'll just play button. Alright, so if I make a panel, okay, right-click UI panel, this will make a new image that scales the size of the container. I just want this to be kind of small in the center. We'll say 200 by 400, okay? And what I want to do is I want to have my UI buttons fit inside this panel. So basically, I want this panel to be a border for those buttons, okay? So if I made these a child of that, okay, now when I move this around, it's a little bit better. but it's not quite the same. And I could fiddle with the anchoring, or I could add a layout group. There's three kinds of layout groups built into Unity. There's a vertical, horizontal, and grid layout group. So if I hit the vertical layout group, you see what happens is it makes its children, so the play button and options, take up equal space of their container. So I can add in things like padding. I could say make sure that there's always 5 units between them, and spacing. Okay. And now as I move this around, right, see, it keeps them all nicely laid out together. There is the horizontal layout group. Okay, you can see it does the same thing. And the grid layout group, we're not going to see much different, but you could see that if I had more buttons, that's exactly what it starts doing. It lays them out in a grid. And you can define things like how many rows and columns you'll have. So for this, we'd use a vertical layout group, and if I had more buttons, right, I could just keep adding them, and then I make my panel bigger, and it looks all right. So anyway, so that's how we do basic layouts. All right, the last thing I want to show you guys is how we put the UI in world space. So this canvas lets us have screen space overlay, screen space camera, and world space. And to illustrate this issue, I want to first solve another common question people have when it comes to Unity. So this gun, okay, it works okay, but what happens when I get up to a wall, okay? You see, my gun goes right through the wall. And if I pause the scene, right, we can see as much. Go into 3D view. Okay, and so what we want to do is we want to draw our gun on top of everything else. And conceptually, this is the same thing that happens with a UI. Before this new UI system was created, this would be how people made their UI. It's the same way we're going to do this with the camera. So, and I'm going to go ahead and move this guy way closer to the wall so I don't have to walk every time. Okay, so just make sure everything still works. Alright, great. So I want to, the first person controller, right, is a camera that draws everything, okay? And I want to make another camera that draws just the gun. And what I'm going to do is basically have layers, okay, where, let's pop back over to Photoshop. Okay, so if I have my camera, okay, it's drawn like this. Okay, let's say my character is up here, and that's a gun, I guess. I don't know. It's going through the wall, okay? I guess the camera's really here that's seeing it, okay? What I want to do is I want to... Here, let me add some colors here. I'm going to use some colors. Okay, right now this camera draws everything. Instead, I want to have a camera that only draws the weapon. So I'm going to make the weapon red, okay? Okay, and so I'm going to have, instead of this black camera seeing everything, I'm going to have a red camera that only sees the red. And now everything else can be seen by this blue camera, okay? But the blue camera doesn't see any of the red. So it's this idea that's called rendering layers, okay? And depth ordering. And this is the same way the UI fundamentally works, or used to work inside Unity. But it's this concept that'll make some of the other UI features make sense as well. So I'm going to make a new camera, okay? And I'm going to give this camera, well, not UI, I'm going to give this camera the exact same settings as this camera. So I'm just going to say copy the component, and then paste the component values, okay? And now I'm going to make my gun a child of that camera. Okay, so right now nothing's different. All that's happening is I'm drawing the scene twice, and I have 2 audio listeners, so I'm going to go ahead and delete the one off the audio, or the camera I made. And what I want to do is, I want this camera made to not draw anything but depth, okay? And I don't want it to draw anything. So now my camera preview is like that. And, alright, look at that. Okay, there's nothing. Okay, so instead, I want my camera to draw a layer that I attached to my gun. So I'm going to make my gun layer. Okay, and I'm going to rename this to gun camera. So what this culling mask is, this says what layers should I actually draw. So I'm going to assign my gun to the gun layer. Okay, and now set my culling mask to draw the gun, and you see all I have is the gun. Now if I hit play, still nothing changes. Okay, what I could do is I can turn off the gun from this camera. Okay, so now you see it doesn't see the gun. Okay, well now the gun's not visible at all, and that's because this camera is drawing on top of the other camera. So I just need to change the depth. That's why I set this to depth only. Alright, and so now I have this argument called depth. And alright, so now my gun, since it has a higher depth than the other camera, it's drawn on top of the first camera. And now my gun doesn't visually clip through the wall. Now, visually is important. Because I'm drawing this on top of every other camera, it looks like it's not clipping, but it actually is. It is clipping with the wall. So if you've ever played an online shooting game where your gun doesn't clip through the walls, but you look at the other people and see their guns clipping through the walls, that's because of this issue. And it's actually a pretty complex problem to solve, but this is the nice quick hack to do it. So this same concept, if I hop back over to the main menu, is how we're going to put a UI in world space, okay? Instead of drawing our UI on top of everything else like we do, we're going to draw it in world space. So the render mode on my canvas lets me toggle between these options. There's screen space overlay, screen space camera, and world space. Screen space camera says I want to have a camera draw this, okay? So instead I'm going to create a new camera, and we'll call this UI camera. And now, when I click on my main menu, I say the UI camera is what draws this, okay? And now I can move my camera around, okay? And you see the UI actually goes with the camera. Okay? And you can see the camera preview down there. And this is where now I actually want to do a similar thing. I'd say only draw depth, and I only want to draw the UI, okay? Similarly, on my other camera, I want to draw everything but the UI. Okay, so now this lets me layer my camera effects. Okay, so if I was going to have post-processing, you do that per camera. This is a very useful thing to do, but as I change I can change some of the parameters of this UI, right? I could set its viewport, rectangle, and you see it basically makes the UI match the size of that. So I'm not going to do that, though. I'm going to say skybox, not skybox. I'm going to delete this camera just in general. And have this draw everything again. And my main menu, instead of screen space, I'm going to say world space. Alright? And so now that it's in world space, you see that I can actually change the position of my canvas. Okay. I can change its size. Alright, and now you can see kind of some of the problems I had because this was not anchored to the top. Okay. So I'm going to keep it like this. I want to scale it down. And I'm going to make a cube that I put in the center of our scene. And I'm going to put the UI, I'm going to try and match it to this cube, okay? And let's attach the wall to it. Let's take the main menu, go to 0, 0, 0. Okay, wow, you can see it's really big. And I'm just going to keep scaling it down. So this takes a little bit of playing and figuring out, but once you get it solved, right, now I kind of have my UI floating on top of that cube. Okay, so if I find my main camera, okay, I play. Alright, you can see that now my main menu is in world space. Now, it's a little sloppy, definitely a little sloppy. But if I made a child of that cube, now I rotate the cube. Right, so now I can really so this would let you put like UIs on like terminals in your game or something like that, however you want to do it, but these buttons still work, right? So that's a very basic overview of the UI system. There's a lot of stuff you could do inside it. These are only some of the features. I didn't even go over all of the different UI components, but suffice to say there are a lot of them. An input field is for if you want to type text. Drop down is for having, well, a drop down of different buttons you can select, etc., etc. Scroll views are also kind of a complex subject, but they let you make scrollable content. So the UI system is pretty great overall. There are some things of it that are a little hard to use, but for the most part, you can get quite a bit done with it. So let me know if you have any questions, and I'll talk to you guys next time.